The victim who changed horror forever. Why was Casey Becker the first victim of Ghostface in Scream? At first, it seems like Casey was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But when we look closer, her murder was much more important than that. Casey was not only the first victim, her death established the rules of the entire movie. And the most shocking part? The audience was deliberately manipulated into believing that Casey might actually be the main character. Casey wasn't a random stranger. Casey Becker was a teenager living in Woodsboro, California. She was part of the same social world as Sidney Prescott, Billy Loomis, and Stu Maker. And there was an especially important connection. Casey had previously dated Stu. That makes her selection much more interesting. Billy and Stu didn't necessarily choose Casey because she was personally hated by both of them. She was useful. She was young, recognizable, connected to their social circle, and most importantly, she could be isolated. Casey was home alone while her parents were away. For two killers planning their first major attack, that was the perfect opportunity. Stu's connection makes it darker. The fact that Casey had been Stu's girlfriend adds another disturbing layer to the opening. Stu wasn't simply killing a completely anonymous person. He was helping murder someone who had been part of his own life. And that tells us something about Stu. He doesn't seem to process murder like a normal person would. For Stu, the killings become a mixture of excitement, entertainment, peer pressure, and madness. This is one reason why the Casey murder is so disturbing. The killers aren't supernatural monsters. They are teenagers from Woodsboro, people Casey might have seen at school, people she might have trusted, and one of them may have known her personally. Billy and Stu were creating their own horror movie. Billy Loomis and Stu Macker weren't simply murdering people. They were creating a scenario. Their plan was inspired by horror movies, particularly the rules and cliches that audiences already knew. They wanted to manipulate Sidney, terrorize Woodsboro, and ultimately create a situation where they could escape responsibility. Casey became the opening act. The phone call, the horror movie questions, the threats, the appearance of Ghostface. Everything feels like a carefully constructed horror movie, and that's exactly what Billy and Stu wanted. The famous phone call. The first call is one of the greatest opening sequences in horror history. At first, Ghostface sounds almost friendly. He asks Casey about horror movies. She answers. Then the conversation changes. Suddenly, the person on the other end of the phone isn't playing a game anymore. He's watching her. He's threatening her. And Casey realizes that the horror movies she knows so well are becoming real. This is important because Billy and Stu are using Casey's knowledge of horror against her. She understands the rules, but she doesn't know the most important rule. The killer has changed the rules. Why Casey was the perfect first victim? Casey was practically designed to become the opening victim. She was isolated. She was young. She had connections to the other teenagers. She was familiar enough to the audience to make us care. And she was vulnerable enough for Billy and Stu to control the situation. But there was another reason Casey was perfect. Her death could send a message. If Ghostface could kill Casey in her own home, then nobody in Woodsboro was safe. That fear would become the foundation for everything that followed. Wes Craven's greatest trick. Now we get to one of the most brilliant decisions behind Scream. Drew Barrymore. Barrymore was already a major Hollywood star. When audiences saw her at the beginning of the movie, many assumed this must be the main character. Hollywood had trained audiences to recognize the famous actress and expect her to survive, but Wes Craven completely destroyed that expectation. Casey Becker doesn't survive the opening. She dies before the story even properly begins. And then, the title appears, Scream. The audience has just been warned. Nobody is safe. Craven was playing with the audience. This was classic Wes Craven. He understood horror audiences. He knew that viewers recognized the formulas. They knew the famous actress usually survives. They knew the protagonist is usually protected. They knew the opening scene often introduces a character who will become important. Craven used those expectations against them. Drew Barrymore's casting wasn't simply about getting a famous actress. It was psychological manipulation. The movie makes you trust the conventions of Hollywood. Then it destroys that trust. And from that moment forward, the audience understands that Scream can do almost anything. Casey's death was part of Billy's bigger plan. Casey's murder was only the beginning. Billy and Stu wanted to create a series of murders that would eventually lead back to Sydney. Billy's motivation was deeply personal. He blamed Sydney's mother, Maureen Prescott, for the destruction of his family after his father's affair with Maureen. So Billy's obsession with Sydney wasn't simply about killing random teenagers. He wanted Sydney to suffer. Stu, meanwhile, became his accomplice. Together, they created the Ghostface identity and used the killings to manipulate everyone around them. Casey was essentially the first piece on the chessboard. Casey Becker was the perfect message. So why did Ghostface choose Casey Becker as his first victim? Because she was the perfect combination of opportunity, connection, vulnerability, and symbolism. She was alone. She was connected to Stu. She belonged to the same social world as Sydney, and her murder could begin Billy and Stu's larger plan. But outside the story, Casey had an even more important purpose. Wes Craven used her to tell the audience, forget everything you think you know about horror movies. Drew Barrymore made us think Casey was important. The phone call made us think she might survive. The horror questions made us think this was a game. And then Ghostface killed her. That opening established the central philosophy of Scream. Anyone can die. Casey Becker wasn't just the first victim. She was the warning. And that's why, decades later, her opening scene remains one of the most iconic moments in horror history. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to Dante DeLeon's series, leave a comment, share the video, hit the like button, and follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and X for more movies, series, and pop culture analysis.